I never thought I'd hear my own voice get me suspended from the job I gave everything to. But there it was, distorted, robotic, and saying things I never said. My name is Alex Granger. I'm 37 years old, and up until a few days ago, I was the senior researcher and compliance lead at Morningside Biotech. For almost 7 years, I was the one people came to when protocols needed untangling or when the ethical line looked a little too blurry. I wasn't some bureaucratic choke point. I was the guy who made sure our work didn't end up on the wrong side of a medical malpractice headline. I had believed in it too, not just the science or the grind, but the reason the rules existed. Back when we were testing in autoimmune therapy in year 2, I remember turning down a rush approval that would have gotten us $1 million bonus up front because the rat study results didn't sit right. It cost us months and strained relationships with the sponsors. But the integrity held. We ended up adjusting dosages, probably saving lives. That meant something. But now all that equity felt like ash in my mouth. They called it a scheduled review, but nothing about that meeting had been scheduled. Not for me, anyway. I walked into conference room H, expecting the usual quarterly check-in, maybe some revision to workflow procedures or new documentation formats mandated by legal. Instead, there it was a waveform on the projector screen, and my face on the thumbnail video window. My voice clean. Confident stating this protocol may proceed without secondary trial review. Special exemption granted under emergency clause criteria. Problem was, I'd never said those words. Not in that sequence. Not ever. I felt cold beneath the collar, like someone had poured ice cubes into the base of my skull. The voice sounded like mine, same cadence, same professional tone laced with regulatory jargon, but it was surgically precise in a way that felt off. Too clean. Too stripped of the slight warmth I usually kept in my tone, even when I was being hard-edged. I opened my mouth to protest, but no one looked at me. It was like trying to speak underwater. HR gave me the rest of the day off, said the board would be reviewing the materials, and that I should take time to reflect. I walked out with my ID badge stripped of server access and a manila envelope containing a printed copy of the transcript, my supposed approval. At home, I sat in the kitchen, the light above humming faintly, the floor gritty with crumbs I hadn't swept up in days. I read the transcript once, then twice. Then broke down each sentence like a forensic linguist looking for clues in my own voice. But it was a polished fake. Not the clumsy voiceovers of some high school kid making a prank. This was professional, deliberate, and someone had gone to great lengths to attach my voice to something that bypassed 2 levels of safety review. It mattered. 2 levels down meant human trials with unvetted compounds. It meant lives. This wasn't just about smearing my name. Someone needed something to go through, fast, and I had been the obstacle. The silence from the team hit me harder than the accusation. 7 years of approvals, audits, and mentorship evaporated. No one reached out, not even Raj, who I'd gone to war with over documentation standards and later beers, after we'd made it through another FDA compliance report unscathed. My phone lit up once, a vague, "Hey, hope you're okay," text from an intern I didn't even supervise. What hurt most wasn't the betrayal. It was how quickly my legacy was amputated. The same people who quoted my policies in training sessions were now pretending I'd never existed. I didn't sleep that night. I sat in the middle of my apartment, a space that had never really felt like home, barely decorated, mostly functional, and wondered who I had been working those 14-hour days for. Integrity? Science? Hell, maybe just my ego. I remembered late nights writing compliance doctrine by the glow of dual monitors, rechecking line items like a lawyer arguing a case to himself. I remembered building the metadata, trails, the little subroutines that recorded timestamps and digital signatures within our internal approval system. And something clicked. They'd used AI to fake the visible layer. My voice, a forged document, maybe even my signature. But metadata. That lived deeper, unseen. Buried in the logs and time codes, none of them ever bothered to understand. They could manipulate surface data, but they couldn't manipulate the systems I had written. Didn't they realize that the guy they just tried to erase was the one who built half the protocols they'd exploited? The synthetic voice might have fooled the room, but I knew where the ghosts were buried, and someone was about to feel what it was like to fake ethics under the eye of the man who designed the truth. It started with a memo, just a short email, no greeting, no conversation. We're informing you of an internal investigation into your recent protocol approvals. I clicked it 3 times, thinking it a mistake. It wasn't. The sender was HR. No signature. Just a formal block of text outlining an internal review into approvals tied directly to my credentials. There were no specific dates, no accusations, just the sterile suggestion that discrepancies had been identified and my cooperation was expected. I scrolled back up. No greeting, no mention of my position or my years of service. Just the implication that I had suddenly become a problem, to be solved. I pushed back from my desk, trying to remember the last time I had approved a protocol. It had been at least 3 weeks. Things slowed down after end-of-quarter reviews, and I'd been buried in policy updates since then. Nothing new had crossed my desk, let alone anything experimental. Still, I went downstairs to compliance. The glass walls looked foggier than usual. Thomas, the junior compliance reviewer, spotted me walking up and immediately pretended to be deep in a spreadsheet. He didn't even nod. Julie, who ate lunch with me every Tuesday, actually stood up and left when I reached her cubicle. I stood there for a second, stunned. 20 minutes later, I learned my access badge had been restricted. 3 doors in the West Wing buzzed red before I gave up and took the stairwell. Not a word from management, not a call, just a code switch I couldn't override. The whispers started the next day. I'd return from the restroom and feel the air shift in the room. Heads bent slightly lower when I passed. People I'd mentored, coached, brought onto the project, none of them texted back. Conversation stopped when I entered an elevator. By Friday, my calendar was empty. No meetings, no calls. On paper, I was still employed. In practice, I was a ghost with a corporate ID number, and then I found out what they'd done. I wasn't in the meeting. Of course not, but I heard from Nora, quietly, almost guiltily, after hours. She worked in data sanitation, the kind of back-end position that didn't attract attention. She called me from a burner app and said, "They played a recording of your voice." My stomach twisted. In what context? "Approving Trial 47C to bypass preclinical thresholds," she said. Like, straight to human trials. No animal data. No ethics review board. I exhaled like I'd been punched. That's impossible. "I would never—" "I know," she said. "I've sat in your sessions. That's the opposite of everything you've taught. But it sounded like you enough that the board didn't even flinch. Cross-checked it with a time-stamped approval doc signed under your login." "Jesus," I whispered. "They said the doc and the voice match, so it's under official audit now." "Listen, Alex." She hesitated. "You didn't do this. But people believe it. They really believe it." I stared at the wall above my desk, lined with reference texts and binders I hadn't touched in weeks. I knew my guidelines cold. I'd written the section that specifically outlawed this kind of acceleration. I said thanks and hung up. The next day, HR summoned me. "Pending investigation," they said, as if it were just another item on their checklist. A polite purge. The room was all steel and silence. 3 people sat across from me. The HR director, legal counsel, and a compliance officer I didn't recognize. My folder, the one with my name on it, the one I'd watched grow over 7 years, rested neatly on the table. The director told me they were placing me on administrative leave, that I would be released from duties, to facilitate the review. Effective immediately. I could taste metal. My hands clenched in my lap, hard enough that my nails dug crescent moons into my skin. "What do you mean, fabricated? It's not even my voice. Have you run it through a spectrogram?" The compliance officer stared at me without blinking. "The audio matches a number of your previous internal trainings. It's consistent." "Consistent with a model, maybe," I snapped. "Not a person. That's AI generated, stitched from modules I led 3 years ago. Have you checked the metadata attached to the file?" "We're reviewing all assets. This is not a disciplinary action at this stage," HR continued, like they were reading from a manual. "But we'll need your company-issued laptop and badge returned today." The moment I handed over my credentials, it was like I ceased to exist. They walked me out through an alternate hallway, one I'd never actually used before, clean and characterless like they'd practiced making people disappear. I stood in the parking garage staring at flat concrete until my phone buzzed. It wasn't a friend, not a manager. It was an automated confirmation. Your security credentials have been deactivated. No goodbye, no message, nothing, just deletion. Sitting alone on the floor of my apartment, I stared at the spiral of printed ethics paperwork I'd pulled from my home archives, pages I used to know by heart. Each sheet felt like a fingerprint of who I used to be, someone who believed that integrity wasn't optional, someone who trusted the system to protect people like me. I sat there for hours, legs crossed, surrounded by my own legacy. And I realized I wasn't mourning innocence. I was mourning the illusion that it had ever protected me. They knew what they were doing. Whoever faked that approval didn't just copy my voice. They copied my mind. They understood the exact phrasing I'd use, the cadence of my sentences, the sequence of logic I buried in every policy. That was the worst part. Whoever built that forgery had studied me. And that meant someone I'd trusted, someone inside, had laid the groundwork. Rage illuminated something cold and clear in my chest. I wasn't going to get vindication by sitting here cataloging theoretical contradictions. HR hadn't just failed to question the evidence, they'd embraced it. A senior compliance lead's reputation was disposable the moment it got inconvenient. But here's what they all seemed to forget. I'd helped build the process they used to hang me, the document pipeline. I helped code part of the protocol parser myself back when we couldn't afford external tools. The access hierarchy within the ethics approval interface? My idea. Digital signatures, I didn't just sign them. I wrote the checklist that verified their origin. So no, I didn't need their help. I needed access. My own access pulled from backups I'd quietly built on a remote encrypted drive after watching the department cut corners last year. Not because I foresaw this, just because I knew it was coming eventually. They called it paranoia. I called it insurance. I wiped my face, took a breath, and got up. It was late. Past midnight when the city outside had gone still enough that the white noise from my air filter sounded like static on an old radio. I powered up my old laptop, the one not issued by the company, the one they never tracked. Within minutes, I had my hands back on systems they thought were buried. The first thing I did was trace the document in question. Every ethics approval passes through an internal compliance commit server, tied into our document routing system. Even if someone deletes a file, the routing metadata gets logged in a version trail. I searched for the hash ID tied to the forged document. The match came back, but not to my user ID, timestamp 2:43 a.m. 5 days before the memo. That was already a violation. No edits or approvals were supposed to happen outside of business hours unless scheduled. Maintenance or emergency clearance was granted. Neither applied here. Worse, the access key? It wasn't mine. It was a generic system admin credential masked under a temporary QA account, sloppy, and lucky for me. I dug deeper. Every transaction on that server gets flagged with a digital fingerprint made up of device signatures, MASI addresses, OS logs, system time codecs. Within 30 minutes, I'd narrowed the login to a company-assigned laptop, tethered to a campus IP address on the West Wireless subsystem. That wasn't IT, that was the data analysis team. Suddenly, the pieces aligned differently. The deepfake crafted from voice modules mined from training sessions. That wasn't just random theft. That required archive access permissions, which only the AI feedback loop team had, which meant someone with basic familiarity with voice modeling systems and access to my work history stitched that Frankenstein together. There were only a handful of people who could have done that, most of them junior, most of them just trying to prove their worth. I opened the access log fully and traced the subthread. The user history pinged back to login initials, DMC learns from text. My stomach sank. Dylan McCrae. The kid I vouched for when they tried to cut the analysts in Q1 layoffs. Fresh hire, barely 6 months into his role. I'd even reviewed his presentation the week before the whole thing dropped. He'd emailed me once, thanking me for making compliance feel clearer. I'd written back, telling him to trust the data before the pressure. He quoted it in the next all hands, and now he'd use my words to stab me in the back. The rage was sterile now, not fiery surgical. I didn't call him. I didn't confront him. That part of me was burnt out weeks ago. Instead, I started building a packet, a full incident log. I pulled screen-grabbed metadata trails, shell command histories, and version differentials across the created document. Then I layered in the audio analysis I ran through 3 open-source forensic models. The waveform showed spectral anomalies, small gaps where human speech would have natural inconsistencies. Those gaps revealed generative smoothing. But I didn't just want to show this was a forgery. I wanted to show it was deliberate. My final step was to flag the document's commit history to reveal the file lineage it had been cloned and reshaped from a different case study template. The original template? One I'd rejected 6 months earlier, for missing vital ethical disclosures. And then came the moment I knew I could win. The AI model logs were left unencrypted on the test server, probably for speed. Inside, I found prompt snippets used to generate voice approximations. They had fed it my language guides, my speeches, my goddamn compliance onboarding call script. They used my own clarity to destroy my credibility. But now I had theirs. I zipped the packet, encrypted it, and uploaded it to the internal third-party ethics review server. Not HR, not legal. The audit body written into our policy language to be independent beyond company reach. I didn't write a subject line, just dropped a title. Integrity Artifact, Audit Request. Then I closed the laptop, leaned back, and let the silence return, this time feeling a little less lonely. I didn't sleep. That night bled into morning, then into a blurry headache of black coffee and bluish monitor glow. I stayed off company networks. I knew how they monitored login patterns, and I wasn't going to leave a trail. Everything I needed was tucked inside the offline cache I'd pulled down onto my drive. Secure, isolated. I spent 14 hours building the proof. Not just one damning screenshot or shaky audio glitch, no. This needed to be layered. Every breadcrumb had to lead somewhere undeniable. One corrupted timestamp wasn't enough. They'd claim system error. One deepfake waveform. Easily dismissed without context, but if I tied frequency spectrums to falsified signature hashes, and lined those up with login anomalies and version control timestamps that didn't match recorded access events, then they couldn't unsee it. I logged each access jump the way Chung's credentials tunneled in and lingered near regulatory outbox folders. I saw he'd attempted 3 document patches during March, all buried, under revision forks to avoid main branch logging. That kind of thing wasn't beginner slip-up, someone walked him through it. My guess? Someone high enough to think they could get away with it. Half the protocol editors he used were meant for confidential pre-clinical projects. Problem was, their access logs still pinged my old watchlist sandbox. I'd coded those trackers back when a junior intern accidentally wiped 6 months of annotated simulant exposure data. I never deactivated them. No one told me to, and no one else remembered they were even there. By hour 18, I had a 7 gigabyte file bundle. Clean formatting, .file trees labeled. According to the original document cascade, even the WAV audio analysis had been annotated with internally accepted forensic standards. I wasn't just exonerating myself, I was constructing something they'd have to explain to lawyers, to auditors, maybe even to the board. The question became, who do I give this to? Not HR, and too many ties. My manager wouldn't return my texts. Legal might have already been briefed by the same people who sanctioned the manipulation in the first place. I needed altitude to neutral territory. There was one way, in Pew, an unspoken insurance clause. During our last systems overhaul, we'd been required to comply with external ethics monitoring protocols. Everything over a certain clearance level had to be reviewable by a contracted third-party compliance firm. Quarterly audits mostly pro forma, but they had a standing contact point for digital submissions. A whistleblower channel, untouched by the company. I prepped a secure courier transfer. Not just an email drop, but a fully registered handoff with authenticity keys attached. I used a virtual enclave registered under a generic flag part of a sandbox instance I'd mirrored back when we were developing protocol approval queues. That meant they wouldn't know where the packet came from. Not at first. Just that it came with metadata too intricate to be cooked up by some bitter ex-employee. I hit send around 3:12 a.m. The file pulse took less than 11 seconds. No confirmation email, just a clean disconnect. Then I shut everything down, physically and mentally. I left my monitors off. Closed the window. Let silence settle over the cooling hum of processor fans like the stillness after a storm. No fanfare, no calls, just quiet. For 2 days, nothing. Then, late afternoon on the third day, I caught the first ripple. I still had partial access to the company's public compliance portal. That hadn't been revoked oversight, maybe, or maybe they figured I wouldn't care, but I did. I watched the ticker shift on a minor update entry. Pending audit note attached to file chain G431PE. That was the fake protocol's tracking ID. A minute later, that entry vanished. Not deleted. Relocated for provisional review. That only happened when an external party flagged a file as a risk vector. I leaned back in my chair, heart steady now. I'd built the trigger and someone had pulled it. I spent the rest of that evening preparing the next file batch, secondary reinforcement. Witness logs of Chung's workstation access from a proxy login hub. Screenshots tracing the exact time the AI audio generation tool had been accessed from our internal license node, which was only registered to 2 department leads. I still didn't accuse anyone. There was no name on the main document. No editorial slant. Just raw data, cataloged and cross-verified. Let them explain it. That night, as the sun finally dipped behind the skyline, someone tried to log into my VPN node. Twice. Failed, both times. They were starting to notice. Good. Let the silence do its work. The call came at 6:17 a.m., sharp, jolting me awake with the kind of urgency usually reserved for hospital rooms or burning buildings. Unknown number. I let it ring twice before answering. A clipped voice on the other end said they were from the external ethics auditors, requesting a confidential meeting in person. They gave me an address downtown, not an office, a private conference suite in a hotel usually booked for mergers and investor hush sessions. Neutral ground. They didn't want traces crossing over internal systems anymore. I got there just after 7, wearing the one gray blazer I still trusted. The room was bright but cold. 2 auditors sat side by side with tablets and hard copies of my data packet, each page tabbed and annotated. I expected questions. What I didn't expect was gratitude. "Your documentation is extraordinarily thorough," the woman on the left said. Her name tag read, D. Hoyt. "We've been augmenting your data with our own internal checks. Within 48 hours of receipt, we had at least 3 significant anomalies correlate." She tapped her screen, including credential misuse by a listed user, an audio signature confirmed by our forensic lab as synthetic, and version control interference routed through internal sandbox modes not normally accessible by that class of employee. I didn't say anything. Just let her finish. "What you sent us," she continued, "is evidence of coordinated fraud perpetrated by at least 2 individuals, possibly acting under instruction from someone significantly higher up the chain. As of this morning, our findings have been escalated to your company's executive review board." I almost smiled. Almost. They didn't ask for additional details. They already had what they needed. What they warned me about, though, was fallout. A high-level audit intervention always triggered containment responses. That meant NDAs, account freezes, digital chain of custody lockdowns. "Expect surprises," the other auditor said quietly. Not all of them friendly. I thanked them and left the hotel as clouds broke over the skyline, casting new light on the same stained concrete walkways I'd passed 20 times before. But today, everything had weight. Footsteps, door sounds, traffic. They all felt just slightly off, like the air itself carried tension. Back at my apartment, I logged back into my sandbox environment out of habit. A flashing alert caught my eye almost instantly. My old project repository, dead for months, had just seen a patch applied from a non-perm internal IP. Curious, I traced the link. The timestamp showed 4:09 a.m. File name? Cleanup. Final v2.docs. Someone had tried to obscure edit history, wiping out all the back-end metadata, and replacing it with a clean administrator log. But here was the problem. My original architecture had never allowed for back-end-only comments without leaving residual cache. The ghost of my own past work saved me again. I restored a deep snapshot from 2 days prior. Compared the file trees, hash by hash. The altered document was intended to bury the approval chain to rewrite the forged protocol as if it had passed through legitimate review. It was an active cover-up, still unfolding in real time. I packed that into batch 2. Then came the emergency all-hands meeting. An internal calendar notice hit public channels mid-morning. Operational review session. Mandatory attendance. No subject, no agenda. It felt like a trap. But I watched the live stream through the back door I still had access to. The CTO was the first on camera. Hair tousled, voice composed but forced. You could hear the crack in his tone, the kind that comes when a man is caught cleaning someone else's mess and doesn't yet know how big the spill is. Then came the announcement. Effective immediately, digital access reviews had implicated several staff in ethics code violations, 1 termination, 3 paid suspensions, 1 voluntary resignation, pending further investigation, no names at first, until the junior data scientist Chung was shown being led from the lab floor by security, his badge clipped and turned upside down. That image, once it hit the internal circuit, sent panic through Slack threads and whisper chains. But it didn't stop there. During the same feed, the compliance officer assigned to experimental review protocols, Reed Jansen of VP and part of the old guard, was publicly named as subject to ethics board scrutiny. His access was revoked live mid-session. The stunned silence that followed was almost louder than the initial fallout. 3 minutes later, my private email pinged. It was the board. They asked for a call. I picked up. The voice that spoke was formal, restrained. He called me Mr. Granger now. Extended apologies on behalf of governance. Said they were deeply disturbed by the findings. Talked about my integrity in the face of institutional failure. Then the offer came. Restoration of my full role and privileges. A public statement exonerating my name. Even a transition to a higher-positioned ethics oversight role newly created effective immediately. I paused so long he asked if the line had dropped. Then, quietly, I told him I'd think about it. I ended the call. Sat in silence. For the first time in weeks, it wasn't the silence of exile or suspicion. It was the heavy, crystalline quiet of things beginning to break open. I never imagined vindication could feel so bittersweet. The reinstatement letter arrived a day later, zipped neatly into a formal PDF with my name restored to every system, protocol chart, and org chart cell they had erased me from. They backed it with a public memo stating that I had acted within the highest ethical parameters and contributed with extraordinary diligence to the accuracy and recovery of internal protocol governance. The wording was careful, legal slick. They still wouldn't name the falsified approvals or the deepfake outright. Denial coded in gratitude. Narrative culturing in real time. A newer employee sent a one-line email. What they did to you wasn't right. I stared at it longer than I cared to admit. Most people said nothing at all. I didn't respond. The team issued whispers of relief, like they were trying to will their own roles back into stability. I watched from a distance as the scaffolding around me reassembled for a play I no longer believed in. Reed Jansen disappeared from the company directory within 72 hours. His LinkedIn went private. They called it a personal leave to focus on health. The only thing sicker than Reed was the way the upper brass pretended the infection hadn't spread far beyond him. The junior tech, Cheng, was charged under digital fabrication statutes. It made local tech news but never sparked national outrage, just one more headline competing with bigger noise. He'd get fines, maybe probation, maybe worse, if Reed turned on him during deposition. I'd stopped tracking the court entries. I didn't need punishment to feel victorious. What I needed was distance, so when the board followed up with renewed offers, higher salary, expanded authority, a public-facing role to restore confidence in ethical oversight, I said no. I didn't say much else. I think they expected at least some acceptance speech. A closing wink to clean the dirt off all their faces. But some mud refuses to be wiped. It stains deeper. Instead, I sent a simple message thanking them for the apology and declining the position. One last time, I logged out of the intranet I'd helped build and walked away. I took a sabbatical, then joined a non-profit dedicated to AI integrity in biomedical development, just like I said I would. Tighter teams, smaller budgets, but no revolving door of efficiency consultants piping policy into loopholes. My days now start with coffee and end without second-guessing who's waiting to stab me from behind a firewall. They assigned me a project tracking deepfake instances in trial approval systems. I gave a lecture in Geneva 6 weeks ago. I opened it with a playback of the AI-generated audio that once claimed I'd signed an unethical therapy into motion. I let the audience hear the way silence can be weaponized, the way technology without guardrails will eat its creators from the inside. The clip ended. I stepped to the mic and said, "That's not me." But it was treated as me. And that mistake almost let someone's shortcut rewrite a patient's body. I didn't mention the company. I didn't name names. Truth has a louder voice when it arrives without vengeance. After the talk, a student approached me, early 20s, sharp glasses, eyes filled with the kind of questions I used to ask myself. She asked if I ever got angry, thinking about all the people who stood by and said nothing. I nodded. That anger's still in me. But anger's not a roadmap. It's a flare. It shows you where the danger was. The question is what you do after the smoke clears. What I did was simple. I rebuilt my name. Not in big moves, in quiet consistency. In letting my work speak louder than my defense ever could. And when I lay down at night now, I don't count career steps or headlines. I count the moments I didn't fold, even when folding would have made the noise stop faster. They thought they could fake me, but they forgot that the real me built the ground they tried to forge over. Every log, every comment, every invisible signature in the system still bore my hand. I might have walked out of the building, but in truth, I never left. Now I teach others the same. Do not outsource your conscience. Do not surrender your name, not even to convenience, especially not to silence.